everybody. I'm Ashley Johnson. I'm from Monticello, Arkansas, and I'm a senior integrated marketing communications student with a specialization in magazine publishing and management. It is my honor tonight to introduce our opening remarks speaker. She is the Senior Vice President of Communications at the Association of Magazine Media, Ms. Susan Russ.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Dr. Husney. I will warn you, I'm not nearly as funny as he is. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is MPA. So we are the trade association for magazine media. If you are not familiar with us, this is our mission. We are the primary advocate for the magazine media industry. And what that means is we go out on our members' behalf, and we have hundreds of members, and we talk about the power of magazines, and that magazines matter, that print matters. So lately I've been reading a lot about mindfulness. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, right? But it's, just being mindful, whether it's what you're eating, living in the moment. So not thinking about, not dwelling on the past, not dreaming of the future. There's some techniques for that. You might spend one day just looking for things that are red, so you notice somebody's wearing a red sweater. I noticed my neighbor's door is red. I don't know if their door was always red or if it was just this. So I decided to be mindful about magazines on my way down here. So you see print magazines where you'd expect to see them, right? They're in the airport, they're in the back of the airplane. Well, there was one in the Uber that picked me up. I got on a very early flight this morning because I was dying to see Graceland, so I was the very first person at Graceland this morning. And there are magazines on display in Graceland. There are replica copies of TV Guide that you can buy in the Graceland gift shop. You check in here, and there's magazines all at the check-in desk, and some of them I'd heard of before, and some of them I had not. So part of what we do at MPA is to battle that perception that magazines are dead or that print is dead. So what we do overall is convene, inform, measure, report, and advocate. So we do that for print and beyond. So we understand that, the world is not just about print, and we're not expecting people to drop their tablets or to drop their smartphones, but that we all exist together in what we call the magazine media ecosystem, right? So print is just one piece of that. And when we say print to digital at MPA, that's digital replica copies. So when you're literally like flipping through an exact copy, it is a very, 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 very tiny part of the print audience. It's less than 3%. So desktop, laptop, mobile web, social media, and finally video. So this is what we consider the magazine media ecosystem. And Tony Silber is in the house somewhere. There he is. So we talk about the ecosystem and that it's not print as the magazine as being centered to it. And Tony did an article several months ago where he really nailed it and said it's the consumer that's at the center, right? So it's that we communicate with the consumer in many, many different ways. And some magazine media, that means events. They may communicate, they may reach their audiences with events. So that we really think of it that way now, that the consumer, so it's not that print is the center, print is part of that ecosystem. The other thing we talk about is magazines are invited guests into readers' homes. So think about it. You tell a magazine, hey, I want your product. Here's my name, here's my home address, here's my credit card information. Magazines are not interrupting people's lives. People are asking for that content. And as an advertiser, you get to come along as the plus one. So it's not popping up. It's not intrusive. You're not trying to block it. You're not DVRing and fast forwarding. It's a very, very different relationship. And some of those techniques, like, you're walking past the Verizon store and you have the Verizon app and it pops up. that may be useful at some times, but it's a very different relationship that magazines have with their customers. So here's a quick quiz. You won't be graded on this. So how many U.S. adults do you think read magazines? 91%. That is correct. Oh, that was Bo. You're a cheater. I should have told you. You were disqualified. But that is true. 91%. And as you get younger, the percentage gets higher. And I see some of the students nodding their head. So that's pretty impressive, right? And maybe not what people would automatically think. But the point is, it's an ecosystem. So I'm just going to quickly take you through a presentation that the MPA calls Magazine Media Tells and Sells. Over the last probably 10, 11 months, we have given this presentation over 100 times to advertisers, both the agency side, the client side. We've done what we call Arm the Army and given it to sales teams at the largest publishers, the smallest publishers, the press. So Tony's gotten to sit in on that as well. And I'm just going to give you some highlights of some of the research and studies that we equip everybody with. So this here is talking about neuroscience. So there's actually neuroscience studies that show why print is different, why print is more effective. So we went through over 150 articles, books, research papers, and said, what does it tell us? What does it tell us about print? This was a campaign that actually ran in Adweek. And these are some of the differences. I'm not going to go too deep into these, but there's studies behind each one of these little circles that's going to pop up. Oops, sorry. So paper-based reading, more focused attention, less distracting. And if you just think about when you're reading an article online and there are many hyperlinks, you get confused, you get overloaded, and you're like, should I read to the bottom and then scroll back up and click? Or should I click on that link now and get taken away and then come back and remember where I was reading? That's a very disruptive process. And you get what's called a cognitive load. Your brain is kind of like, all right, now I'm glazing over there. Contributes to its impact on readers. So when you're reading on print and digital, it's a very different experience. Is anybody familiar with haptics? Do you know what haptics mean? Touch, right? So there is something about touching the paper, turning the page. If anybody's done any work with early literacy, that's why they say it's so important even before a kid's expected to read, long before kindergarten. You give toddlers books. They chew on those books, right? That whole experience of just touching and feeling and understanding how the paper works, well, that has an impact on people. And those haptics, I know it's true for myself, but if I take notes by writing things down, I remember it better than if I, type it into my phone. Reading speeds differ. So I know this is true for me too, that it's a deeper engagement when you're reading something on paper than it's scanning mode. So they've put people in fMRI machines, and that's what measures brain activity, and they see that different parts of the brain are stimulated when you're reading on paper than when you're reading digitally. Stimulates emotions and desires, same concept, and that for short-term memory translates to long-term memory. So that's great if you're trying to remember something. It's also great if you're trying to advertise something, and that your product is going to stick with people. And higher comprehension and recall, same thing, so it transfers. The last thing I think is great, that this was just asking people, which do they prefer? Do they prefer reading on paper or do they prefer reading digitally? And even millennials say that they prefer reading on paper. That doesn't mean that people don't appreciate what they're reading digitally, but that it is the preferred method. So that's some of the neuroscience studies. And again, that was not research that we did ourselves. It was we put together a white paper, MPA put together a white paper of all studies that were already done. The same, I'm just going to take one quick second because I wasn't sure if everybody in the room was familiar with the purchase funnel, right? So that's the path to getting a consumer to buy your product. And the top is the awareness, and the bottom is the persuasion. And basically what you want to do is you got to get people in the top of your funnel, right, to buy your product, all the way down to purchase intent. So you're not going to buy a product, most likely, if you've never heard of it before. And that there are certain media that work better at different points. And again, you think of yourself, that TV may make you aware of a product, so you know, but if you have no interest in buying a pickup truck, you may be able to name, a Ram pickup truck, but you're never going to move through that funnel. But the idea is that you have to be in that funnel to get down to the bottom. So a pop-up ad for a pickup truck is probably not going to get you to buy it if you're not aware of it. So what we have found is that Millward Brown did a study of 100 advertiser commissioned studies. So they compiled them. So advertisers want to see if their campaigns are effective. What Millward Brown then went and looked across all of those effectiveness studies, and what did they come up with? Is that campaigns that used print and online improved those persuasion metrics by 10%. Those are the metrics where you're going to actually buy the product. Campaigns that used print and TV improved purchase intent by 17%. So when you put print in any campaign, it's going to improve the likelihood of someone buying your product. When we do this presentation, the whole thing takes about an hour. Because we go into all the different combinations and all the different platforms, and every time you add print, it goes up. Now, granted, if you're doing a combination, it's going to go up because of the combination, but print's the one that really drives it through the roof. So another study that came to us from Nielsen Catalina is they looked they looked at 1,400 advertiser campaigns and what was the return on advertising spend. So for every dollar you put into a campaign, what came back out? Print came out $3.94. So for every dollar that an advertiser spent in print, it came back at $3.94. And that's a big jump from what digital did, right? So digital was $2.63. So we've been taking this everywhere. This was actually an ad that ran in the Wall Street Journal. So how confident are we in all of these studies, right? It all sounds really good, but how confident are we? Well, as an industry, we have launched a print magazine sales guarantee. And that means exactly what it says, that we sell, this is across industries, it was developed by Meredith Corporation, that if you advertise in print, we guarantee a positive return on investment, that you will sell more than if you didn't. Now, I won't take you through this entire campaign or how the campaign works, but it has to be a large enough buy because you have to reach enough people, and it has to be something that's trackable. So it's a lot of consumer packaged goods. So it's things that are scanned. And what they do is, because if you go back to magazines know their customers, that they're able to look at whether or not you're a subscriber to the magazine where the ad ran. And they're able to prove that the subscribers where the ad ran bought your product more than the people who didn't, more than the control group. So they've done 75 of these over the past, really it's the past 4 years because Meredith's been doing it longer, but this is across multiple companies. And out of those 75 campaigns that are run, not a single one had to give money back. Not a single one didn't deliver. So that's how confident we are in this. Okay, so we talked about the funnel and the reach and needing to reach a broad audience in order to get them into the top of that funnel. So people say, well, magazines don't have the reach that they did before. Well, that's not true. What this is showing you here is the audience for the top 10 television shows and also the top 10 magazines. And if you look at it, it's pretty remarkable that the top magazines beat all of the top television shows. Every Monday night football, every NFL football, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Walking Dead. So it's pretty impressive. So it works at the top of the funnel too for that reach. And in most cases, it's a lot less expensive too, which we like to make the joke to advertisers that you better get in now before everybody realizes that and raises the prices. But then if you look at the smaller titles, you say, well, fine, that works for people. People is absolutely humongous. Of course, that's believable. Well, if you look at the smaller titles too, so if we look at Cooking with Paula Deen, it has a bigger audience than Hell's Kitchen, than Master Chef, than even Top Chef. So it works across the car titles. It works across Dwell. If Dwell were a TV show, it would be the highest rated shelter and home decor TV show. So it's pretty impressive when you think of it that way. Okay, so, oops. So we talk a lot about print, but we want people to understand that print is just one piece of the ecosystem, but it's also a piece that other media companies don't have. So that's what makes us unique. And it's huge on social media. Does anybody know what is the largest brand on social media? So not a person, not a Kardashian, not a Bieber, but what is the largest brand? Nat Geo. National Geographic is the largest brand across social media. And if you think about it, the pictures, they're huge on Instagram. They are the biggest brand. Next is Vogue. Okay, so the other pushback we get is, okay, magazines are great, magazines are huge, but they can't compete with Google. Well, we don't compete with Google. We feed Google. So when you do top searches, when you do the most popular ones, the top 5 are always magazine brands or within the top 5. So you look at best mascara, you look at best cars of 2006, you look at diet tips, you look at fitness tips, you look at recipes. They're magazine brands. Magazines are what are feeding Google search, and they're consistently at the top. The other thing we do is I talked about measurement. Who's familiar with Magazine Media 360? All right, so one of the things that the MPA set out to do about 3 years ago, when it was launched a little bit more than 2.5 years ago, the only measurement to show the health and vitality of magazine media was circulation and ad pages. So what's that measuring? It's measuring one platform. It's measuring print. That is not a realistic picture of what the magazine media audience looks like. You wouldn't measure the Super Bowl by how many people are in the stadium. You don't measure television shows by how many TV sets there are. So we embarked, again, it's third-party research. We do all the compilation. We have 126 magazine media brands who we report on every month, and it's the only one of its kind that measures the entire audience across print and digital, web, all the things I talked about in the beginning. And what it shows is, so that black line on the top is the overall audience. And yes, if you're thinking to yourself, well, aren't you just adding it all up? Like it's repeated. And that's the point, is we like the idea that people consume magazine titles across platforms, that if you're on the bus, you're reading it on your phone. If you're at the beach, you're reading it in print. If you're sitting at your office and you're Googling something and you're reading it on your desktop. So the top line is the overall, the black is the total score. That red line is the print and digital, and as I said, the digital is really small. And if you look, yeah, there was a little dip in there, but it's really holding very steady. And what you're seeing is that green line is mobile, and that's what's going up, 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 and up. And what's dipping a little is web. And again, think of yourself, like how do you consume content? And the bottom is video, and video is growing by high double digits, but it's still on a small base, right? That one takes some investment, and not everybody's there yet. So this is just a snapshot of Magazine Media 360. Separately, we measure social media. So we look across platforms, and we look at the top brands on social media. And we have some enormous audiences on social media, so that's important too. What we're working on now is an engagement metric for social media, so that will be rolling out hopefully at the end of June. Okay, so here are just a couple success stories. I won't go into all of them, but I mentioned one at my table before. You know, people talking about, newsstand is down, newsstand is suffering. Well, yes, that may be true, but also retail is suffering, right? You think about how you consume, like how many people here have Amazon Prime? Right? So you're not going into the store. Products are coming to you. How many people get their food delivered? Fresh Direct is, the new big thing by us. So people aren't confronted with magazines at newsstand in the same way that they were. But Magnolia Journal, which just launched, Meredith Corporation just launched that. Chip and Joanna Gaines, you guys familiar with who they are, HGTV? They had an initial print run of 400,000. It sold out. They went back on press for an additional 250,000. And the next issue is, if it's not out now, it's very soon to come. Another story that and Vanity Fair, Atlantic, The New Yorker, they all have phenomenal subscription and newsstand stories over the last few months, really since pre-election and then post-election. Airbnb, I think that's just such a fascinating story, right? So here is a digital-first company. I mean, they don't even have a real inventory. It's a platform. Yet they launched a magazine with Hearst because they had Pineapple Magazine, which now they have morphed into Airbnb through their partner Hearst, because they feel that will just extend their brand to their users, and that it gives people a different way to experience their brand, that they can think about where they want to go next. It's not a catalog. You're not looking at like what's the next Airbnb I want to rent. It's about where to go surfing, where to eat when you're in a certain place. So I think that's another really just neat story. There are 7,000 titles currently in the U.S., and that's a number that has held steady for the last 9 years. This year alone, how many titles do you think were launched? Let's see if any of your students know this. Because this number comes from Mr. Magazine himself. Anybody? 200 plus magazines. Did I get that right? 234 to be exact. So that's pretty impressive. The last couple things that MPA does, I mentioned advocacy. We have a small but mighty office in Washington, D.C. They advocate for a number of things, everything from tax deductibility on advertising. So right now it is tax deductible. It comes up every now and then that somebody wants to make it not deductible. So that's something. It could be things just to how freelancers are paid. But the thing that they've been focusing on, really spending most of their time, is postal rates and postal efficiencies and different delivery systems. So you might have seen a lot of that in the paper, and you will see more as what they call the PRCs, the Postal Regulatory Commissions, their 10-year review is up. So the post office is claiming that they cannot be profitable without raising rates, and we say that they can be much more efficient and just do business differently. And I talked about convening. These are some shots from the American Magazine Media Conference, which is what our annual conference. This year we had Ron Howard sit with David Remnick and talk about storytelling. We had, in the middle there, it's an editorial panel, and they were talking about credible journalism. So not fake news per se, but just why magazine journalism is different. That they don't print anything that they haven't researched. Parents Magazine isn't going to give you a hunch. They have a panel, they have an advisory board that's made up of physicians. The Good Housekeeping Seal is real. So talking about the quality journalism. And then I'll just finish with a little anecdote here of sort of real life, how much people love magazines. Back to my mindfulness, as people were hoarding magazines at the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. We put up a magazine booth every year. There's 2,000 attendees. We went through 12,000 magazines. People were taking stacks of them, and these are folks who are being wooed with fancy dinners and given, Beats by Dr. Dre headphones, but they still want their magazines. So thank you very much for hearing why we think that magazine media matters, why magazines matter, why print matters, and why we think that 2017 is the year of the magazine. Thank you.
Before Susan introduces our next speaker, we have a little gift appropriately wrapped with all our sponsors. This is a book, The Statue and the Fury, written by an Oxford author, Jim Dees, signed by him, that just won the Silver Award in the Nationwide Independent Publishing Book Association.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. So next I will introduce our keynote speakers. So we have the Hoffman family here. So Phyllis Hoffman de Piano is going to come up and lead the family discussion. Is that how it's going to work? Oh, and by the way, if anybody has any questions or wants any of the research I mentioned, there's my contact info.